did. I don't have it yet.
You don't know this one?
No.
Because I have it in my address book under Monty.
College of Hawaii.
Oh, you're charming.
They found that. No,
Somebody was a deal.
they ought to have.
Anyway, my story is about LeGrand. This is noisy. I'm trying to figure out how to make it short so it'll last a long time. And I'm being timed, so. Some of you.
Oh, thank you.
Some of you knew about or met Marnie, who used to be a...
He's related to your brother.
Okay, now, who wants to tell the next story? Okay, well...
I got a joke that Terry's already heard.
Marnie and her husband lived in the basement with LeGrand and Blanche, and Marnie kind of took care of him. Those of us who met her thought she was really a special person, but situations in their life were such that they needed a change. So a new assistant helper for LeGrand came up.
The Granddad Blanche.
For LeGrand and Blanche, and Karen told us that she was going to be there, but she had a problem. The problem was that her mother, back in Brazil, had a heart attack, or had a heart problem and needed heart surgery. And so that she couldn't come until she went back to Brazil to help her mother, and wouldn't be able to come and live with them until that was resolved. I don't know all the details on that, but that's about it.
Just for 2 weeks.
Just for 2 weeks, okay. Well, I mentioned that in a letter to our grandson, Kim's son, Alex, who is on a mission in Rio de Janeiro. And in the letter I received from him last week, he said, that was a very interesting story you told. It just so happens that, I want to tell it, not read it. It's too short if you read it.
Yeah, it gets
It just so happens that the first counselor in our branch presidency has a daughter who has who lives in the U.S. and lives in Utah with helping older people. And it also just happens that she has been home in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, because her mother had a heart attack, or had a heart problem and heart surgery. And so, lo and behold, the young woman who is taking care of LeGrand now.
He said also, you should have just read it. He told what her name is.
Oh yeah, he said her name. I'll read that part. He says, I don't know if this is the same one that takes care of LeGrand, but it sure is a coincidence, huh? Her name is Christina. And so this is an example of how small the world is here. Our grandson is on a mission in Rio, huge city, and a gal who's the daughter of his French president is taking care of a member of our family. So my wife thought I should share that with you. Sorry.
That's all?
That's all it is.
Scott wants the end of this story, and now... Okay, who'd like to tell a story?
Ken has a story.
Okay.
Well, I can't tell as nice a story as Ross does. He does such a good job of just talking. But I'll share with you a story that I wrote because it's kind of pertinent to what our family does. My brother is a technician of some perfection. Profession. He's a perfect. You fill in the blank.
Everyone has an opinion.
For those of you who are interested, I've collected a number of stories on the Allen family. I just wrote one recently in connection with the reunion of Orson William Allen family, which is occurring today in Richfield. And Hale Buchanan, who is Uncle Ross's cousin, he's about your age or a little older.
He must be older.
A little older. He's a retired professor also. Hale Buchanan is at Weber State and one of the world's experts in Rocky Mountain botany. Recently written a book about the botany of the Rocky Mountains. And he just finished an autobiography of himself. And I had told him, we started correspondence through genealogy, and I told him that I was interested in finding out some of the details of what the geography was like where his family grew up in Wayne County. And so he gave me his write-up of the geology and the flora and fauna of the area, and I used that as the basis of the following short story to give you an idea of where and what our family lived when they founded the town of Teasdale. Spanning the spine of the Wasatch Mountains, the western ridge of the Rocky Mountains, and the eastern shore of the Great Basin is a political creation called Wayne County. Seen from high above, Wayne County would appear to be an anomalous trapezoid cut in a federally decreed map spanning the plateau and Reef region of south central Utah. Wayne County, created on May 2nd, 1892 from Piute County, is surrounded on latitude lines by Sevier and Emery counties on the north and by Garfield County on the south. the mountain ridges of Piute County bound the west, and the Green River of San Juan County and the desolate wilderness of the Canyonlands bounds the east. It goes without saying that survival of life in this high country is challenging. In the western quartile, mountains and hills, cliffs and canyons, and massive reefs and ledges surround small, fertile valleys and a few hollows along a 7,100-foot high plateau above Capitol Reef. The region is laced with fantastic, delicately colored rock formations of yellow cake, coal, and iron. A map hardly does justice to the terrain. The Fremont River snakes nourishment through the western plateau like a great artery, flowing from the elevations of the extreme northwestern corner of Fish Lake, southward through the Rabbit Valley, roughly parallel to State Highway 24. It passes the Mormon farming towns of Fremont, Loa, and Lyman, then turning eastward toward Bicknell at the Bicknell Bottoms, where it is joined by Pine Creek. The Fremont River is then joined from the south by Bullberry Creek and Boulder Creek. Then it winds between Teasdale and Torrey along the scree of the south-facing chocolate-covered cliffs of the geologic Moenkopi Formation. This ledge forms the base of the 11,300-foot high cone peak of Thousand Lake Mountain, which pokes like a pyramid in the distance above a 1,000-foot high wall. Opposite are the north-facing white, pink, and lavender rock cliffs of the geologic Chimla and Navajo formations. A prominent ledge of Navajo limestone frames the base of the gently receding slopes and blue timber-covered ridge of the 11,330-foot high Boulder Mountain, its peak hidden from the valley floor. Boulder Mountain is the lifeblood of the valleys below. Yet its prominence is nearly lost in this surrounding 11,300-foot high Aquarius Plateau, which is large enough to hide the city of San Francisco. Below Boulder Mountain, just southeast of Torrey, the Fremont River flows into the narrow gorge of the Fremont River Valley. North of Torrey, out of the rocky hollow east of the bare, brown Torrey Bluff, Sand Creek flows eastward, joining Sulphur Creek and Fremont just beyond the gorge above the fold of Capitol Reef. Capitol Reef divides the land as if separating heaven from hell. The Fremont cascades 2,000 feet down the fold of the reef in less than 5 miles, at the same time draining the whole front of Water Pocket Fold, as the base of the reef itself is called. The river, nearly dry during some parts of the year, passes between treeless mesas, beyond canyons and hollows of moonscapes, slowing along the Canesville Flats. Then it flows onward to the oasis of Hanksville. Just beyond Hanksville, the Fremont is joined by the Big Muddy River to form the Dirty Devil River. The Dirty Devil River meanders southeastward toward the great mesa-rimmed canyons of Garfield County to the mighty Colorado River above Glen Canyon, which is today filling with the silt of Lake Powell. In the 1930s, a spectacular portion of the Fremont River Valley east of the Bicknell Bottoms was known as the Wayne Wonderland, where fossils and a petrified forest once evoked curiosity. In 1937, President Roosevelt proclaimed the Fremont River Gorge in the nearby north-south Water Pocket Fold in the Earth's crust, Capitol Reef National Monument. In 1968, an act of Congress created Capitol Reef National Park, at the same time designating the wild country along the far eastern edge of Wayne and Garfield counties as Canyonlands National Park. About 1 mile south of Highway 24, 3 miles southwest of Torrey, is a 7,000-foot high circular valley, not more than 3 miles across, surrounded on all sides by hills and rocky ridges. It is the tiny village of Teasdale. Above the light-colored Navajo cliffs to the south looms lofty Boulder Mountain, with its broad, flat-top plateau obscured from the view of much of the valley. Bullberry Creek flows eastward out of the draw of Boulder Mountain through the center of Teasdale, providing the water to irrigate garden lots and nearby farm fields. Black lava rocks are strewn over the sandy red hills from an ancient flow off the adjacent peaks. The natural vegetation is pinyon, juniper, sagebrush, rabbit brush, and bulgur. A broad scrub-covered mound rises a few hundred feet among the eastern fields, northeast of the town center. Just to the west are red sandstone hills, where a water tank once stood, full of culinary water. A narrow road cuts a notch, forming a portal to Main Street, and a dusty rutted track angles back to the northeast to the cemetery, where monuments of graves in the open desert rise above the scrub. The cemetery has a few fresh graves among those more than a century old. A state road leaves town to the southeast, climbing past Grover, where for many years it ended in a trail around Boulder Mountain. Back then, the trails south to Escalante and Garfield County skirted the mountain. On the east, the main trail, recently paved as Scenic Byway 12, leads up and over Boulder Town from Grover, climbing well over 8,000 feet past ponderosa pine forests, then through true montane forests of aspen and fir. In places, the traveler looks down sheer cliffs, thousands of feet, in the presence of vistas of hundreds of miles over the water pocket fold across the eastern desert to Colorado and Arizona. Looming at a shortened distance of 50 miles of clear air stands the silent volcano cones of the Henry Mountains, like ancient pyramids, 7,000 feet above the arid basin below. Dropping down to a plateau to follow a ridge called the Hogback above Calf Creek, the traveler enjoys miles of an unsettling and unshielded view down several hundred feet on each side of a stingy two-lane road. To the west is Hell's Backbone, far above a sheer-walled canyon known as the Box. Below, the Escalante River wends eastward through a fertile valley, now rarely canopied in its trademarked rich blue sky. Today, the purity is marred by the windless haze of a distant coal-fired power plant. No place on earth compares to Boulder Mountain and its surroundings. The people of Escalante enjoyed the relative isolation of their valley until their soil gave out under the stress of heavy grazing and torrential desert rains. Then a few hardy families moved over Boulder Mountain, settling with their sheep and cattle in the valley along Bulberry Creek. Soon it was renamed Teasdale after the Mormon apostle George Teasdale, who had called upon them to tame the valley and to civilize it. Teasdale was settled nearly exclusively by widow Lydia Catherine Mann Adams and her large contingent of grown children and their young families. Lydia was an early Yankee convert to Mormonism from Leeds, Ontario, Canada, who had crossed the plains with the Mormon pioneers from Nauvoo, Illinois. A younger brother stayed behind in Iowa to die in battle serving in the Union Army in Missouri during the war between the states. She married a widower, a Scotsman and ironmaker, David Barclay Adams, likewise an early Mormon convert, and they answered the call to Zion. She followed her young husband and his first wife's children to raise as her own, as she assisted in founding Cedar City and attempted to establish the iron mission in the region. Lydia came to Bulberry Creek, a widow having buried her husband on the other side of Boulder Mountain in the well-kept cemetery of Escalante. The first families arrived in 1878. Orson William Allen and Lydia Catherine Adams Allen were the parents of Louisa Jane Allen. All the Adams brothers eventually moved away from Teasdale, although grandmother Adams, her 4 daughters, and their families stayed. Orson and Lydia Allen settled in Teasdale, where Orson tanned leather, farmed, and served as Justice of the Peace. William Henry and Cynthia Jane Adams Heath settled also in Teasdale. John and Elizabeth Adams Covington became prominent settlers at Grover and Torrey. All of these couples were the uncles and aunts of William Barry Allen. Cynthia Allen married Samuel Rogers, and they settled in Loa. John Williams Allen married Grace Fordham, and they settled their families in the mountain towns of Grover and Fish Creek. In the early colonization of southern Utah of the 1860s and 1870s, the extended family of both David Barclay Adams, the Scottish ironmaker, and Daniel Allen, the Yankee tanner, were among those called by the LDS church leaders to settle in iron and Beaver counties. That's our heritage. That's our Allen heritage. David helped found Cedar City in the abortive attempt to establish native iron making for precious nails and horseshoes. Prior to that time, all of the nails in Utah had to be shipped by wagon across the plains. It would take 6 months to get nails across the plains. But they found iron in Iron County and attempted to refine it into steel from which they could make nails. It didn't work too well because the iron was quite different than what David Adams was used to from Scotland, where everybody had their own little kiln to make iron. This, by the way, is a photograph of the inside of the house at Teasdale. You could show around the inside.
Yeah, let me just insert here. Hale Buchanan, my cousin that he talked about, is Louisa Jane Allen's son. Louisa Jane was my father, Grandpa Allen, William Barry's sister. And Hale had a copy of a family photograph at the funeral for their mother. And so this is Orson William and his family, and the one on the top, second left, is William Barry Allen. And these are not very good copies, but I made a few in case some of you wanted to have one of them. So
this is about the Buchanan family, which lived very close to the Allen house. The Buchanan family lot in Teasdale was a 6-room house with a lawn and a flower garden in front. A row of cottonwood trees lined the front or north side, and other shade trees surrounded the house, providing shade during the hot summer. Vegetable gardens were located in the front of the yard east of the gate through a running board fence under the cottonwood trees behind or south of the house, and west of the house between the rows of plum and apple trees. Our farm was located about a mile from town in the cove near the road from Teasdale to Grover. The old road from Teasdale to Grover going eastward about a mile from town passed near a rocky hill to the north. Alfalfa fields, grain fields, corn patches, and potato patches of the Buchanan family were located between the road and the high sandstone cliffs in the south. The Buchanan family first lived in an old house that had been the leather and harness shop, which belonged to Orson William Allen. So they had actually lived in the harness shop where Orson William had his shop. The house had one large room downstairs and a kitchen lean-to built on one side. The older children had bedrooms in the attic, which was accessed by way of an outside stairway. During 1924, my father and older brothers helped Ernest Jackson, a carpenter, build a 6-room house on our lot. Only one room, the master bedroom, was finished when I arrived in the family early in the spring of 1925. That's when Hale was born. Later this summer, the house was finished and the family moved into the house. The older house was then moved some distance farther south and east after the lean-to kitchen had been removed. The front room of the new house was furnished with a large table where the family meals were served. The pine floors were covered partly with throw rugs made from clothing scraps that were sewn in strips, then woven on a loom. The wooden floors were frequently swept and scrubbed. The house had a front window and a large bay window. Bookcases were constructed under the window seat of the bay window. Mother always had pots of living plants in the window, mostly geraniums. The front room held a foot treadle organ with fancy carved wood, a nice cupboard with glass doors where the best dishes were kept, a hutch with a fold-down desk door, more bookshelves and a mirror, a milk saver, and pantry cupboard, the combination bed and day bed, and enough wooden chairs and stools for the family to use during meals. Farm life was very interesting. By the way, this house was very much like the Allen house. Much of it revolved around the wood-burning stove in the kitchen. We called it the Black Monster. In the wintertime, the stove burned from early morning darkness at chore time until bedtime, when the fire was banked for the night. Hopefully live coals could be found the next morning to be stirred and coaxed with kindling on the grate to get a roaring fire, to heat water, cook breakfast, and provide heat for the kitchen. Family members dressed in front of the stove prior to attending to outside chores or getting ready for school. Children stood on the wood box corner near the hotter end of the stove to watch their mother prepare breakfast. This she did by moving the pans and kettles around the stove top to obtain just the right amount of heat for the cooking procedure. When a pan of food was cooked just right, it was covered and placed in one of the warming ovens or placed at the oven end of the stove, where the surface temperature was just warm but not hot. The flames from the firebox would go across the top of the oven to warm that part of the stove and heat water in a reservoir attached to one end of the stove. When a family member had been outside doing chores, came into the house, he could stand by the stove to get warm or place his cold feet at the open oven door to get warm quickly. You have to understand, this place was 7,000 feet above sea level, so you don't just go to the wall and turn on a switch to heat the house. The steaming tea kettle on the stove and the reservoir near the oven provided the hot water, appropriately cooled in a wash basin by addition of cold water from the bucket of the washstand, and that was used for washing hands and face. Later, hot water from the refilled kettle was used for dishwashing following the serving of breakfast in front of the room with the big table. And any time during a winter day, the kitchen table was a cozy, warm place for homemaking tasks or for doing homework or school classes during the evening. During some evenings, a hot fire in the old majestic wood-burning stove provided the heat for popping corn and for making honey candy as part of the recreational activities of the family. During the summer and fall harvest season, many bushels of fruits, corn, string beans, and other food were canned on that wood-burning stove in the kitchen. The kitchen of the home is the real heart of the home. Many a meal was prepared over the years on the blackened, majestic wood-burning stove. Tons of cedar and juniper and pinyon logs were hauled from the foothills to be chopped into stove-length pieces and chips to fuel the black monster. The stove turned out several loaves of crusty homemade bread several times a week, as well as a delicious meat, vegetable, and dessert dishes for meals. The food story of farm life meant the preparation and enjoyment of ample food each morning and midday. The meal shortly after noon of the hard work days on the farm was dinner, as the name implied, and it was a huge meal. Supper was served after the hard day of farm work and was often a lighter meal, such as a bowl of homemade bread and milk with fruit and some leftovers from the pantry. This farm family survived mainly on what they could grow on the land. They ate good basic food and they made for themselves from scratch. Farm families had a tradition of serving ample food in a pleasant, friendly atmosphere. Fresh meat was not available all the time, but in season, when a farm animal was slaughtered and was butchered into steaks, roasts, or made into sausage, when a game animal, such as deer, was killed on the regular fall deer hunt. Meats were frequent in meals until the sources were used up. Likewise, fruits and vegetables were used fresh daily when available during summer and fall. At other seasons, meals included the bottles of food from the basement and rehydrated corn and fruits, which had been dried during the summertime. Sugar was scarce and was seldom purchased during the Depression years of the 1930s. Honey produced by the family was used as a sweetener on cereal, in cooking and home canning. On Saturday nights, a galvanized tub was brought into the kitchen, where family members would take baths by turn. Often, the used bath water from one child was simply warmed by addition of more hot water and used for the next child. Older members of the family could afford to have fresh, warm water in the tub for a bath. When the kitchen became a bathroom, the doors were closed and kept respectfully closed during the bath of one person, while the other family members stayed in other parts of the house. The wood-burning stove heated many gallons of water in a longitudinal copper boiler, which was placed directly over the flames for wash day once a week. The boiler was refilled several times as the clothes were washed in the kitchen on a scrubbing board, a hand-pumped washer, but later a speed clean electric washer. Cold water on a separate tub was used for rinsing. The washed, rinsed, and wrung out clothing and other household items were then hung on the outside clotheslines. On the day following wash day, clothes were sprinkled, wrapped tightly, then ironed smooth with flat irons that were heated in the old wood-burning stove. So, of the comments they made was, this was all before electricity. One of the comments they made was that in the evenings, they sat around the kitchen table with the gas lamp. They had little oil burning lamps. And they do their homework and talk. But when electricity was introduced into the home, they had a light in every room. And all of a sudden, their social life vanished as they went to different parts of the room. And they didn't spend as much time together. But that's a fraction of the story, and I think probably relevant to give you a flavor of what life was like in the 1930s before electricity came to Wayne County. And in fact, there were no paved roads in Wayne County until after World War II. Imagine that.
Now there's one.
There's one paved road. All right, thank you.
Thank you.